Dr. Lindsey Shields is the Director of Training of the Global Health Program at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Dr. Shields studied animal science as an undergraduate student at Virginia Tech and earned her DVM degree from the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine in 2011, where she took the public corporate track with a focus on public health and epidemiology. Immediately after graduating, Dr. Shields began her career as a consultant for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO. While with the FAO, she spent 2 years in Rome, focusing on wildlife health and ecology issues, and another year in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, working on food safety programs in East Africa. As the intervention manager for the livestock and leather industry for DAI, an international development company, Dr. Shields spent another 10 months in Addis Ababa researching the livestock and leather sectors in Ethiopia to identify business opportunities to benefit the poor. During the 2 years immediately preceding her current position at the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. Shields was an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer in the Waterborne Disease Prevention Branch at the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, during which time she participated in various international responses, including the typhoid fever outbreak response in Zimbabwe, the cholera outbreak response in Tanzania, and the Ebola outbreak response in Sierra Leone. Thank you for being on the podcast, Dr. Lindsey Shields. Welcome.
Thanks, April.
It's so good to see you. It's been, 6 years now since we graduated from Virginia Tech?
Yeah, time flies, right?
Yeah, and you look just the same.
So do you. Way to go.
So, looking over your biography, I just feel like I want to call you 007. If I read this biography and I didn't know you were a DVM, I would have no idea what your educational background was. This is you're doing stuff that I never would have associated with, a career in veterinary medicine. It's so fascinating. So what I'm wondering is, when did you decide to be a veterinarian, and the life that you're living now, is that what you envisioned when you decided to become a vet?
Yeah, great starting question. So I was very certain that I was going to be a horse vet from the time that I was very little and was consuming nothing but James Herriot novels and I'm going to go live in the middle of nowhere and I'm just going to hang out with goats and sheep and treat horses and it's going to be great. And I was really passionate about that. I mean, all through when I was growing up into high school, and my parents were like, well, what about other things? Would you want to be an MD or maybe a lawyer or some other thing? And it was always nope, I'm going to be a horse vet. And I went to undergrad and I did animal and poultry sciences at Virginia Tech for undergrad, and it was the most fun degree ever. I mean, what other college degree will give you the opportunity to get a horse, a yearling, and your only job is to train it for a semester and you get a grade on that. And so I would go out to the barns 3 days a week, and I had a horse named 11 and I trained her and then we sold her at an auction. And it was just an amazing, incredible hands-on learning experience. And by that time I'm definitely a horse vet, for sure. And it actually wasn't until veterinary school, second year bacteriology with Dr. Hodgson, that I discovered that I had this crazy passion for disease and for pathogens, and thinking that, the way that diseases move in populations was probably the coolest thing I'd ever heard about. And that was where I really switched to this very different sort of career path that, veterinarians can actually take, which is probably not your common career path, looking at more of an epidemiology route. So. Yeah.
Right. Epidemiology. And what was it? What was the name of our epidemiology professor? He was so
Dr. Elvinger. He was the best.
Elvinger. Oh my God.
Yeah. I've actually kept in pretty good touch with him since we graduated. He's now, I think he moved to Cornell or Penn. I can't remember which one.
Cornell. Yeah.
Cornell. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was great. I actually reached out to him a few times. I most recently reached out to him when I was trying to decide whether I wanted to move back to the U.S. and do a PhD program, or I wanted to move back to the U.S. and work for the CDC. And he was a great resource and super helpful to chat through that stuff with. So.
Wow. And you mentioned that, so you've done quite a bit of work in epidemiology. And have you had extra training in epidemiology outside of Because I have to tell you, that class in epidemiology was like, woo, okay.
Yeah, and I even took an elective epi class while we were in vet school, which was like insane. So I took quite a bit of public health classes while in veterinary school. And then after veterinary school, moved to Italy and worked with the Food and Agriculture Organization on a number of different projects that were sort of epidemiology related. And I worked with people who had done, PhDs in epidemiology and really deep training in epi. And so I learned a little bit on the job from them. But most recently, I did the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which is a 2-year fellowship with the CDC.
Oh, it's
and it's really like an on-the-job crash course in epidemiology. And I got into a PhD program that was going to be focused on public health and epidemiology. And I also got accepted to this EIS program. And the reason I went with the EIS program is because you really just get thrown into it. You really are pushed to be, hey, go out in the field. You're trusted to be the one that's doing the work. You're working with real data sets with real life implications right away. Mm-hmm. And for me, I just learned so much better and so much faster when there's sort of a little bit more pressure on, rather than sitting in a classroom and trying to play with a data set that I don't really have any invested interest in. Mm-hmm. And that was really where I learned a lot of my quantitative skills of data analysis and, how to respond to international disease outbreaks and blah, blah, blah. And it was an absolutely incredible training program.
No, sorry. What was this training program called?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The Epidemic Intelligence Service. So it's a CDC 2-year fellowship program. Yeah. The only people that are eligible to apply are DVMs, MDs, PhDs. They do take nurses, but they don't take people with just a master's degree. So they recruit about somewhere between 60 and 80 people per year. And it's really a funny process. Like you apply, the applications I think are due in August. You find out in December if you've been accepted. You interview in October, find out in December. And then in April, you actually get flown to the CDC Epidemic Intelligence Service annual conference, which is like April or May each year. And then you basically go through this sort of a match program, almost like you would have after a veterinary internship or residency. But it's like also like kind of like a fraternity sorority match. It's very weird. You go to this big conference and you have this badge on that like identifies you as somebody that's been accepted to the program and looking for a placement. At the conference, there are like all these tables of all these CDC offices that are trying to recruit people with these red badges to come work with them. There's usually about 120 positions, and there's usually somewhere between 60 and 80 officers. So not every position will end up matching with somebody. Oh. So it's great. You just feel like everybody loves you for a week. It's great. You're, wandering around. People are like, oh, I'd really love to tell you about what we do. Come meet us. And it's a really unique way of getting an opportunity to get to know the program that you're going to work with, as well as the people you're going to work with. And frankly, there were a couple of groups that I thought looked really amazing on paper. But then when I went them, I was like, ooh, I can't work with this kind of a person as a supervisor. Like we're not going to jive. And so it was really, really fun. And then at the end of the week, you rank your top 3 choices. They rank their top 3 choices. It goes into some black box, and you basically get matched. And so it's a crazy, crazy program. But
what if there's no match? What if like the 3 that you chose didn't choose you, and the 3 that chose
we actually rank our like top 10. Because you're not supposed, they try really hard to make it so that no one they call it falling through the match. It happens from time to time. It's pretty rare. If you do fall through the match, they basically, again, because there's like 120 positions and only 80 officers, they'll call you up, or they'll call one of the offices up and be like, hey, this person ranked you. You didn't rank them, but they're going to fall through the match and you didn't match with anybody. Would you like them? And oftentimes they're like, oh, yeah, absolutely. We should have ranked them, blah, blah, blah. So.
Oh, interesting. This sounds very similar to the process for the AVMA AAAS fellowship program in Washington, D.C. I just talked to somebody like that. And it was sort of like they had a big party, and then everybody was supposed to like get together and schedule interviews. And that was my concern. Like, well, what if there's like, you end up without a chair during this musical chairs ceremony? Yeah. And he said there's so many more positions than there are people to fill them. So
yeah, it's really great. And I have to give credit to the folks that do the selection. The people that were in my EIS class are some of the most impressive people I've ever met. And so the idea that one of them would not be matched somewhere is just would be shocking. They're really, really wonderful, wonderful people.
So what is this EIS class that you speak of?
So almost like a veterinary school class, when you do the fellowship, you end up having a class of like the 60 to 80 people that they take per year. And in July, you spend an entire month together doing nothing but training. So from 9 to 5, sometimes 8 to 7. You're just in class. You're doing problem-based learning exercises. They're showing you how to set up a case control study. They're teaching you how to like manage your data, play with EpiInfo, which is like a great program, and all this other stuff. You know, you have an introduction to SAS class so that you can actually do some of the quantitative data analysis that you've probably never heard of before. And a lot of times they do recruit people like me that really loved epidemiology but hadn't had any formal training in it. And so, you know, they expect you to come in with nothing. And so they really teach you from the ground up. And it's really like trial by fire. And after that month, and even during that month, the people that you're going to be placed with to work with are like reaching out to you like, hey, when do you join? Like, we have so much work for you. Can you just come now? Like, and so it's really fun. But, you know, throughout the course of the 2 years, you get together with your classmates. They have an EIS conference every year. So a lot of times those guys will get back together. A lot of people end up staying in Atlanta. And so that's always gives you kind of a fast friend network.
Amazing. And so somebody who's like been practicing small animal medicine for 10 years could apply for this fellowship?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if anybody is out there listening to this and is interested and wants to reach out to me, like, please feel free to. I'm happy to talk you through the application process, because there are some things that you kind of want to make sure you do when you're applying. Like, for example, you know, they're not looking for they're actually not recruiting for people who have been doing outbreak investigations and epidemiology for 10 years. Like, they're looking for people that are either looking to make a career change or are really passionate about, you know, infectious diseases and want to learn more. And so they want to have people that are very clear about, hey, I'm coming in and I'm bringing this to the table, but I'm missing this other part. And I want to be an EIS officer because I want to learn this or that. And so having a clear understanding of what it is that you want to get out of it. I mean, for me, I'd been living abroad for 4 years. I felt very comfortable in the international scene, but I wanted the quantitative data skills that I didn't have yet. And I actually chose a posting that was purely human health focused, because I wanted to be able to talk the talk from both the human side and the animal side.
Oh my gosh, how exciting. And thank you so much for that offer. So I'll put your contact information in the show notes. It's very generous of you. Perhaps I shall do that. Although I'm up in Flagstaff, I don't see myself relocating, but really, really interesting stuff.
They do postings at the state public health departments too.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, I need to look into that.
And actually, I know the person that was the EIS officer in New Mexico.
Oh my gosh, that's very close to where I am. Yeah. So we skipped over veterinary school because there's just so much about your bio that I want to get into. But if I don't follow chronological order, we're just going to be all over the map.
Totally fine.
Going back to veterinary school, tell me, what was your impression when you first started? How did you feel about it?
Actually, I mean, I will go back to this. Maybe gives you a little insight into like how goofy I really am. But I remember very, very clearly interviewing for vet school, because it was 2 days before I left. I did my last semester of undergrad. I was actually studying abroad, and so I got the word that I could interview for vet school, and it was literally 24 hours before I was getting on a flight to Australia. So I was already amped because I was about to go on this great study abroad program. And I was so nervous in the interviews. And I remember like walking through the halls and everybody else seemed so impressive. And I was just like, oh, I'm never going to make it. But I'm also like a pretty goofy person. And the last thing I said to my interviewers, was I literally called them all liars. And immediately like panicked. I mean, it sounds worse than it is, but basically, you know, the interview's over. I was the last one of the day. You know, everybody looks tired. I'm kind of like, end of the interview, we're walking out and I'm like, oh, like, man, I guess you guys must be really tired after a whole day of that. And they're like, oh no, we really love interviewing students. And without thinking, I was like, liars. And then immediately was like, oh, what did I do? And I like went out to my car and like cried and called my mom. And I was like, I'm never going to get in. I just called them liars, you know, just like totally panicking. But I was like, I guess it's fine because I'm going to Australia. And then I ended up getting accepted because I guess Dr. Spanenberg thought that my joke was funny. Thank God he was on my interview panel.
He had such a good sense of humor.
I know. I very much appreciated him. But so I started vet school and I was really intimidated by everybody. I thought it was I thought it was pretty stressful. I was also briefly, so I don't actually have an undergrad degree. I actually got in from vet school, which was great because I was like, I need to save $10,000. Like vet school's expensive. Mm-hmm. But that meant that I was actually trying to juggle finishing up classes at undergrad at the same time as I was doing the veterinary school first year classes.
No way.
And I made it about 2 months before I was like, I can't handle it. I am not sleeping. Like I'm running from like during our lunch break, I was like sprinting across campus to go to a class. And so I ended up giving it up. And I think, it's just really intimidating being around all these really smart people that you seem to all have it figured out. And the reality is none of us have it figured out. We're all just kind of
and that's so funny because I thought you were one of those really smart people. I was intimidated by you. You're like so together and so happy and jubilant all the time. I was like, oh, it's so easy.
This girl.
So easy for her.
No, I was just as much a disaster as everybody else.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. Yeah. So I didn't even know that you were trying to finish your undergraduate degree. Well, at the same time you were in vet school.
Don't do that.
Insane. Because you didn't need to, because you'd already gotten in. You had all the required classes that you needed to qualify. And there's a lot of people like Dr. Allison O'Kell. Do you remember her?
Yeah, exactly. I will say that it does. It has come up a couple of times. It's never been a major issue, but it does come up occasionally, especially if you're working in the international sphere, because a lot of places internationally, a veterinary degree is actually an undergraduate degree, and so only having a veterinary degree, if you work in an international sphere, sometimes people are trying to understand what your level is, and they think that your level is sort of different than you actually are. And so that has come up a few times, nothing major, and usually just a conversation, and it's fine. But anyway, just maybe for people to know.
Interesting. But it's not stopped you. I mean, clearly it hasn't been an impediment.
No, no, definitely not. I think there's a lot of things that I recently got ACVPM certified, and I think that has been helpful as well. Because I don't have an MPH, because I don't have a PhD, I think having the certification that shows that I do know what I'm talking about when it comes to preventative medicine and epidemiology is actually very helpful. Right. But for a while, when a lot of people in the international sphere will be like, "Oh, BS, DVM," and I'm just like, "Oh, DVM."
Nobody puts BS, DVM. I mean, usually it's just DVM, and you just assume the rest.
I know. It's
DVM MPH, DVM MBA, DVM ACVIM, etc. So you're board certified then in preventive. It's preventive, right? Yes, I always wanted to say preventative, but preventive.
Me too. I even wrote it that way like half the time.
Yeah. I just got schooled by Dr. Corrigan that it's preventive and not preventative, because
it is.
He and
I actually took which Dr. Corrigan? Girl or
Jimmy? Boy? Dr. Jimmy Corrigan.
Got it. Yeah. So Jimmy and I actually took the ACVPM board certification at the same time. We were like, "Oh, hi, fancy meeting you here in Ohio."
Cool. Yeah. And he was telling me that like pretty much you need to pull all the study materials together for yourself. And, it's not like, in vet school when you take an exam in gastroenterology.
No, it's definitely a challenging board exam. I think, I think I was lucky because a lot of it is focused on epidemiology and public health. And I was doing my EIS at the same time. And so I had just gone through this kind of intense training program about it. And so I was very well placed. The funniest thing too was about 2 weeks before that, I sat for the boards. I was, in Atlanta, like studying with a couple of my friends, like, oh, we're going to need to really crunch these last 2 weeks. And then I got a phone call, and there was an outbreak of botulism in a prison in Mississippi. And I was the officer that was supposed to respond. And I could give it up, but it was really, really cool. So I was like, I think I'm going to go do that. I might fail this exam, but that's going to be a much better learning experience. And so for like the 10 days before the exam, I was actually out in Mississippi, like responding to this botulism outbreak in a prison. And it was hectic. And I remember, I would not have passed that exam, like hands down. I would never have passed the exam, except I took it with two of my good friends who are also EIS officers. And literally the morning of the exam, we're driving to the exam and I'm sitting in the back of the car and we're kind of doing that like typical, like, oh, let's like quiz each other on like botulism this or like Campylobacter that. And they started like quizzing each other. And it was like we were kind of going around in a circle and I said something and they were like, oh yeah, this. And yeah, good job. And then they'd be like, oh, what about this other thing? And I'd be like, I've never heard of that before. and literally like 6 of the things that they'd brought up in the car were then on the test.
Oh my gosh.
I really have to give them credit for helping me pass.
It was meant to be. Dr. Shields, clearly. So I remember in 4th year clinical rotations, I was on the small animal track. So I spent most of my time in the teaching hospital. And you guys that were on the public corporate track, you were just doing all kinds of exciting things. I remember you and Dr. Simeone were off in foreign countries doing all kinds of amazing things. So tell me a little bit about your 4th year experience.
Hey. Sorry.
That's your dog from Ethiopia.
Literally supposed to be quiet. You have one job. One job during this thing. One job. Sorry, that's my Ethiopian street dog. She doesn't always listen to me. Will you shut up?
Aw, she's feeling neglected.
She is fine.
But
she's literally.
What were some of the like really notable or super interesting or exciting things that you remember from your 4th year clinical rotations?
Oh man. So I had a pretty random assortment of clinical rotations. From the clinical rotations or from the public corporate rotations?
Well, mostly the public corporate, because,
okay.
I know what it was like in the hospital.
I actually like loved ophthalmology. And so I actually added in an ophthalmology rotation.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, it's funny too, right? Like I can tell the story and make it sound like I really knew where I was heading and like, oh, I'm definitely going to go this public corporate route and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, in reality, like when I was an undergrad, there was a brief period of time where I was like, I think I like agricultural economics. Maybe I should do that. And, and then when I was in vet school, there was like, oh, I really love anesthesia. Like maybe I could do that. And then an ophtho rotation. And, I really was testing a lot of different waters, I think, throughout the time. But other than loving ophtho and more specifically to the public corporate track, so there's another CDC fellowship that if people are interested in being EIS officers in the future, it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door. And it's the epidemiology elective program. And that is usually somewhere between a 4 to 8 week experience with the CDC. You're based at a CDC office somewhere. And you basically do like a mini EIS experience kind of. And you're paired with a mentor and you basically work with them on a project. I applied for it and I didn't hear back from them for a while. And then I heard back from them and they were like, hey, so if you are interested, would you be willing to go to Alaska? And I read that as like, you're probably not going to get chosen, but like, if you're willing to go to Alaska, maybe you can get chosen. So I was like, yes, I'll go to Alaska. And so I ended up in Anchorage, Alaska for 6 weeks during the coldest part of the winter. Terrible planning on my part. But working with Dr. Tom Hennessy, who's an amazing epidemiologist. I think he's an MD by training, but really just a wonderful, wonderful guy who helped me learn a lot more about epidemiology and kind of pushed me to get excited about it. It wasn't all glamour. I mean, I was literally walking from this house that I found that was a mile away because I was too cheap to rent a car. Because remember how poor we were in vet school? Like that was a real thing. And so I was like, oh, I'm only a mile away from work. I'll just walk every day.
In the Alaskan winter?
Yes, I'm an idiot. Like truly an idiot. I had to like buy little crampon things because the roads were like all ice. And the first day I did it, like I kid you not, the first day I did it, I had snotsicles and my eyes froze shut. They froze shut. I was like, what is happening? I've made a horrible mistake. But I also got to do really cool work where I was looking at trying to understand the prevalence and risk of giardiasis in Alaskan Native populations and local veterinary clinics. So I was doing a lot of calling local veterinary clinics to get an understanding of like which animals they had diagnosed and how. And then the other part that sounds really cool, but is like slightly less glamorous, is like going and doing chart reviews, which is like a giant pile of charts. And then you're just looking through them one by one, looking to try to figure out who actually was diagnosed correctly as giardiasis. So,
right.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great learning experience. So that probably stands out the most. I don't know if you remember this, but while we were in vet school, Dr. Tracy McCracken, who graduated from our vet school a few years before us, reached out and said, hey, if anybody is interested, we can't pay you, but if you want to come to Italy and work at the FAO for a few weeks, you're welcome to. It was like one of those random emails that went out about fourth year rotations at some point in our third year. And I jumped on it. I was like, I mean, whatever. It's just loan money, right? And so I literally just like planned to go to Italy, and it was definitely a big risk-taking experience. I was there for 8 weeks because I added my vacation block to that. So I was
smart. Now that was smart.
There. It was great. Like 2 weeks before, I think I went over like 2 weeks before I started working at FAO and just kind of toured Italy for a little while by myself, and then started working with the FAO. And I was there for 6 weeks, and it was wonderful, and I loved it. And I really just every day I was so excited to go to work. And the stuff I was doing was just totally random, but super fun. And actually, that experience is why I moved to Italy right after graduation. About 2 weeks before graduation, I still didn't have a job. I was interviewing actually for the AAAS fellowship. And I think the interviews had gone well, but I hadn't heard back from them. And I got a phone call from my boss from my time in Italy. And he was like, hey, I've got a job that I'd like to offer you, but it's a short-term contract. It's only for 2 months. And I was like, Scott, I can't move to Italy for 2 months. Like, I can't. And he was like, okay. 4 months. And I was like, done. So I moved to Italy right after graduation on a 4-month contract, and then ended up staying for 2 years.
Wow. So it was the connections that you made during that external rotation when you were a fourth year student that got you that job that like set you on this path. Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think it also goes back to risk taking too. I mean, I was in a place where I was I didn't have any pets. I wasn't dating anyone. I was pretty open to doing anything. And, this opportunity, I thought worst case scenario, I'll move there for 4 months, have an incredible time. And if they have no more money to keep me, I'll move back to the States and look for a vet job. Mm-hmm. An absolute worst case scenario, maybe live in like a friend or my parents' basement, which I was not looking forward to, but was willing to take the risk. And it ended up working out.
Wow. So when you say move back to the States and take a vet job, you mean like just go into small animal clinical practice? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I sort of always feel like that's a fallback. Now, I have not practiced in a small animal clinic ever. And it's now been 6 years since I graduated vet school. So I'm very aware that I would have a steep learning curve and would probably be like just totally a mess for the first few months. Mm-hmm. And I would probably go to a vet clinic and be like, hi, I'm really cool and I'm going to work really, really hard for you. You don't even have to pay me for the first 2 months because you're going to be training me. But after that, it's going to be great. And so, I haven't had to do that, but I do still feel like if I really needed to, I could get back into it. It would be scary. It would be hard, but
yeah,
like it could be done.
But I mean, you've done scary and hard things before. I'm sure it'll be fine.
We all have, right?
Yeah. So, all right. So just backing up a little bit, you said, you got this offer to go to Italy when you were a fourth year student. They didn't pay anything. And, it's just loan money. So do you mind my asking like how much student loan you graduated with?
I was incredibly lucky. I graduated with $80,000.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I was super, super, super lucky.
That is awesome.
I was basically a scholarship hound. So my undergrad, my housing and living and expenses were paid for. I lived on campus all 4 years in a dorky like nerd house for lack of a better word. It was like, they're like the honors house or whatever. I did that. I applied for every scholarship I possibly could every single year, every single semester. I was looking for scholarship money. And the same was true in vet school. And, I lived very cheaply. I always shared a house with other people. I never had my own space, which, was a little bit sad because it's nice to have your own space. But I mean, looking back on it, I was spending maybe $350 a month on rental, like on a house that I shared with Dr. Adamany and Dr. Konka back in the day.
Right.
And I didn't eat out very much, and I was just really frugal. But again, it was like the combination of frugality and just being really aggressive with
scholarships. Yeah. So it was like, 500 here, 1,000 there, but it all adds up. And that's money that you're not paying interest on while you're in school.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think being able to not pay interest on stuff, for all of undergrad, I exclusively took out loans that were the type that did not begin accruing interest right away. I can't remember the name of them, but I exclusively took those out. And then in vet school was when I started having to take out the larger loans. But the only year that I took out the max was my senior year. Every other year I asked them to give me a less amount because I knew that I was going to.
Nice. Yeah. Senior year would have been expensive for you because you were traveling all over the place.
It definitely was. And I have wonderful parents who I think paid for my flight to Alaska. But for the most part, everything else was on me. So
nice.
I'm pretty frugal.
So that's I heard the advice that you should live like a student while you're a student so that you don't have to live like a student when you're a vet.
Yes.
So you did it right.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly it. And I mean, and I also painfully so. I mean, I started out being paid nothing when I was living in Italy. I really, I think I was living off of 2,000 euros a month. And so, a lot of the glitz and glamour of what you see on papers was also a lot of hard work. I mean, I moved to Italy. I didn't know that many people. And I knew that I really needed to be careful with money because I was also paying off loans. I think back then, the income-based repayment was like just getting started and I didn't really trust it. I don't know why. I just, in my head, I was like, that doesn't seem real. Or I'm going to get screwed and they're going to take all my money eventually. And I don't want to do that. So I just started paying it off at like the 10-year plan amount. And I just, it was hard work. I lived with like 2 Italian guys that like taught me Italian, which was great. And, had this tiny little place in Italy that was just magical and I loved it. But, my roommates didn't speak a word of English. So that was great because I was forced to learn Italian. But, I was also really careful. And, thankfully I had friends there that were also similarly not, making tons of money. And so we would go out and we would at lunch, the best part, at lunch in FAO, you could get this salad bowl for €1.50. And it would come with like this little, it wasn't a big bowl. It's like this big little bowl of salad and like a little piece of bread. And you could get it for €1.50. And all of us who were sort of on this like low salary, we would go every day for lunch and take that little salad bowl and pile it up as high as we could. And as long as it didn't fall while we were checking out, it was totally fine. And so, I was reminiscing with a friend of mine who actually now works in DC for WFP, which is the World Food Program. Totally different background. He's a climate guy, but he lives in DC now. And we caught up and we were reminiscing about that. It's like, man, we're like eating a very nice plate of food with like a glass of wine. We're like, whew, it's been a minute since those days.
It's sort of romantic though. But when you went over there and it was just a 4-month contract, I mean, so how did it turn into 2 years? They just liked you. And you were working as a freelance, like a contractor, right?
I was a contractor. Yeah, exactly. I was a contractor for the entire time that I was with FAO. They call them consultants, but it's the same difference. And it is like a scary thing, and you have to be in the right place and time to be able and willing to take that risk. I didn't have a husband or a boyfriend. I didn't have children. I didn't even have pets. I was really well placed to take some of those risks. And I know that I had a loving and caring family that if everything went to crap, they would, really be mad at me for wasting time in Italy, but they would, at the end of the day, let me sleep in their basement. So that was all really helpful. And I was really lucky to be able to take those risks. But yeah, I mean, so the UN system is difficult to get into. But once you're in, if you work hard, you are often able to stick around. And, there's ways to negotiate your salary. So by the end of the first year, I think I had added like 30% or something to my salary in negotiations and contract negotiations. So I was starting to be able to afford things. And like, I moved to an apartment with like a girl that I knew instead of these two random Italian dudes. And, I could go out and have pizza for dinner and eat some good pasta for lunch instead of the salad. And, so it just took time, but, I really just worked my butt off, and, I did good work. I was always the person that, when something weird came across my boss's desk and he was like, Lindsey, do you want to do this? I was like, yes, absolutely. And, that gave me a lot of opportunity to travel. So I think I moved to Italy, and, 2 weeks after I moved there, my boss was like, so we have a conference in China. Will you come? And I was like, sure, of course. Why not? And so, I'm on a plane to China, and, just being open to those opportunities and willing to be the first one to say yes, I think really helped make the case for me to stay. And I stayed for 2 years, and it was always a little stressful towards the end of the contract because, after 4 months, you're kind of like, so my flight back to the States, is it like my flight back to the States and I'm not coming back or what? And usually the contract would come through on like the second to last day. Oh. So you're definitely like biting your fingers and trying to figure it out. But it was, it was hectic, but worth it. I think my first contract was 4 months. My next contract was 7 months. Little known fact in the UN, if you're a consultant, you cannot be employed for more than 7 or 11 months out of 1 year. You have to take a month-long break. And it's an unpaid break, right? So that sucks. So you have to kind of save up for that month throughout the rest of the year. But it's also great because you have a month off. I think I was spoiled in being able to have this really great work-life balance of, I have a month off. Like I can go travel. I can stay here in Italy and tool around, or pick up another job on the side if I wanted. Go back to the States and spend, a whole month with my folks or my friends or whatever. And so then I think my second year, I actually requested a 7-month contract. I didn't want to do a year contract because I wanted to renegotiate my salary after a few months. And then I did. And long story short, it was a lot of consulting stresses and learning how to manage your money and time and, advocating for yourself for more pay.
Yes. Tell me about that, because a lot of women aren't all that great at advocating for themselves and negotiating a better salary.
And I don't know that I'm great at it anyway, but I had a really great friend who worked at FAO for years before I joined, who kind of coached me through the process for FAO specifically. And the way that it works in FAO is you would basically get these terms of reference that show, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're responsible for. And I imagine they'd have similar things in private practices, whether like every couple of years or every year or whatever, they give you a list of like, this is what you're expected to do. I actually wrote it for myself a lot of the time. And whenever I did, the trick was to include in there words that indicate a level of leadership or ownership. So instead of saying like assist with blah, 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 you're like lead blah, 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 or like run blah, 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 or like, and I imagine if you're in private practice, the same holds true. You can be like, I'm not assisting in, case management. I'm leading case management. And then being able to turn that and say, look at how much I'm doing. I've increased my responsibilities from last year, from, when we first negotiated this contract. I should be paid more based on the change in the responsibilities and the in what you're expecting from me. And so that was sort of how we did it. And I imagine some of that would be somewhat translatable to other organizations.
Right. So is this something that you initiate? Like, I need to set up a meeting with my boss because I'm going to ask you for more money.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and I think it was probably easier in FAO than it would be in other places because we were because you're a consultant, you're sort of forced to revisit your terms of reference or your scope of work every at least 11 months.
Okay.
And so whenever you revisit that scope of work, 9 times out of 10, your boss is like, hey, we definitely can keep you. We have money to keep you. Can you just reformulate your TORs and send them to me? And that's when you have the opportunity to be like, yeah, I've updated them. Let's have a meeting and sit down and talk about it, where you can go to them and say like, hey, I think I've done all of this. I'm going to request a raise from, $180 a day to $250 a day, or whatever raise it is. And I think it also helps to know what's normal, because if you're being paid $250 a day and you want to ask for a $300 a day raise, but everybody else in the office is being paid $210, then you're not going to get it. And you're kind of going to come across as an asshole. So as much as you can, figuring out sort of where the right amount is.
Right.
And I can tell you very clearly, I'm not great at it. I was negotiating on a different contract for a consultancy position in Ethiopia, and I thought I'd killed it. I was so proud of myself. I was like, oof, got it, nailed that. And then I started working, and I found out that like one of the people that I was working with, who was like basically I was supervising, was making more than me. And I was like, damn it. Oh!
That's awesome.
So, again, it goes back to like knowing what the starting point is. And right. I just had no idea what the starting point was.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the hardest. That's the most mysterious part of the equation, I think.
Yeah.
I think if you're an organization like FAO and people are, mostly making the same and they're open about it, but,
yeah.
But I think what you made was a really good point about negotiating. Is it's not about going to your boss and saying, I need more money because I have these expenses. It's about, this is what I'm worth because I do this, I take ownership here, I take leadership there. That's what.
And I think I've got friends who are working in clinical practice that I've talked to and have recently gone through this kind of salary negotiation question. And, and I think from the clinical side, it's really helpful to be able to look at your numbers from the last year and say, like, I'm making you this much money each year. And, I'm taking in only this much salary and you're taking home this much. And, I am not asking for you to give up much. I'm asking for just a little bit of a raise to be able to better reflect the amount of money that I'm bringing in for your clinic.
Yeah. So, all right. Now tell me, what were some of the things, like in concrete terms, what were some of the things you were doing? You said that you were working on wildlife health and ecology issues in Rome. So give me an idea of that, because I have no concept of what your day-to-day would have been like.
Yeah, it was crazy. I look back on it with such fond memories. So for example, our little group that I worked with was the Emergency Prevention System for Animal Health. It's called EMPRESS. And it basically is supposed to track and monitor disease outbreaks globally that affect animal populations, whether they be livestock or wildlife. The particular group within EMPRESS that I was working on was focused mainly on the wildlife component. So looking at wildlife disease outbreaks, looking at issues that were threatening wildlife of concern for conservation, and looking at emerging diseases in wildlife populations across the board. So it was actually pretty funny. Every morning at 8:15 a.m., our whole team would meet and in this like big conference room, and everyone would have like 2 seconds to go around the table and basically talk about it. First, they would present like, hey, in the last 24 hours, we've had 50 new cases of foot and mouth disease in Kazakhstan and like 20 of these other things somewhere else. And they would basically go through the list of like, here are the urgent things that we've identified this morning that we need to like maybe do something about. And then you'd go around the room and people would be like, okay, like I'm on that avian influenza in China. Like I got it. I'm going to call the China office and we'll go from there. And, if it was a wildlife focused thing, I'd be like, well, that one's mine. I got it. Like I'll follow up. And then it often like revolved around following up with our FAO in-country offices to find out if the national government of that country was requesting assistance from FAO, or if they needed any sort of backstopping that we could provide from headquarters. Sometimes they would request for people to come out and have boots on the ground, and people would then fly out soon after that to try to go give direct technical assistance. And by direct technical assistance, I mean like helping them on the ground, like how do you take a sample? Where do you test it? How do we confirm that what you said is foot and mouth disease is really foot and mouth disease? How do we make sure that your foot and mouth disease outbreak doesn't spread to your livestock over there, and decimate your herds and blah, blah, blah. So that was sort of the sexy, interesting side. We also did a lot of, I was also a coordinator for the Scientific Task Force on Wildlife and Ecosystem Health, which took quite a bit of wrangling and time. And that was basically a task force that was meant to look at wildlife and ecosystem health issues. And so I interacted then with people that were representative of other organizations that also had buy-in on that. So that would be like the United Nations Environment Program. They have a conservation on migratory species. So I worked with them. I worked with like some World Wildlife Fund people. And we would basically kind of keep abreast of all the new happenings. We would put out recommendations for, if there was an avian influenza outbreak in wildlife populations, we would put out recommendations on, hey, do this, don't do that. Watch out for this. At that point, when avian influenza was hitting, people went out and like killed a whole bunch of wild birds, like not really thinking through whether or not that was actually the right thing to do. And we know now that wild birds are the reservoir for the variety of avian influenza viruses, but H5N1 kills them too. They're not immune to that. They're not, carrying it around and not showing illness. And so, going out and murdering a whole bunch of wild birds that look healthy is probably not a good method to being able to deal with the disease. So, that would probably be some of the easiest tangible stuff. There was always a lot of random stuff. We were working on a wild meat project of zoonotic disease risk associated with wild meat consumption, food safety issues, just a ton of sort of random competing interests all over the place, but mostly a lot of wildlife disease outbreak response.
Yeah. And this is like, you're pretty much fresh out of school. So I imagine that, if you end up having to work on the foot and mouth project, that you were doing a lot of self-study.
Oh, right? Yeah. They'd be like, I remember very clearly there was a Saiga antelope die-off in Kazakhstan in 2012. And I'm sitting in this meeting and they're like, oh, there's this Saiga antelope die-off. And I'm like, yes, that is the wildlife species. That is mine. Yes, I will follow up. I love those Saiga. And then I went back to my desk and I was like, what the hell's a Saiga?
Exactly. Yeah. I love that though, because on the surface, it's like, oh my God, you're like superwoman. You're just doing all this stuff. But the reality of it is you're still teaching yourself and looking all this up.
Every day. And I think if I'm ever in a job where I feel like I know everything, I'll be really bored. Because the thing that's so exciting and different is learning new things and being able to, make decisions about things. And I think that's sort of where I've ended up is like, I know a little bit about some stuff. But I love thinking about how to apply the knowledge that I have in new ways and learning new things about it. And, I think that's really, really helpful.
All right. I know that we've got a limited amount of time. So I want to just get a little bit about like your experiences in Addis Ababa and like, okay, what you were doing. Yes. But also what was it like to live there? And did you meet your fiance?
It was amazing, first of all. I loved it. A crazy story though. So I moved to Addis for a boy, is the real story. I mean, on paper, right, it looks very like, oh, and then I wanted to go to the field and do this other thing. And like, that's also true. But like, I moved to Ethiopia specifically because there was a boy. And
he's your fiance.
We got married. We're like married now.
Oh, you're married. Congratulations.
Thanks. Oh. Yeah, weird. I'm still getting used to calling him a husband, but and he's great. He's the best. But we actually went to high school together. We lost touch all through college. We reconnected right before I moved to Italy and he moved to Ethiopia. And we were like, oh, we're definitely not going to date. Like, this is crazy. And then 6 months or so after we were both living in our separate continents, we were like, actually, like, that guy's pretty cool. And so we started doing this long distance dating thing, and we did it for a year and a half. And my big thing was like, I'm not moving to Ethiopia until I have a job, because I'm not somebody that does well unemployed. And I know that for a fact, because I recently had some unemployment time and it was really, really annoying. Anyway, so I moved to Ethiopia, had a job, was transferred to the FAO regional office down there to do consulting work on food safety issues, which was great. And I moved from Italy in the summertime to the rainy season in Ethiopia, where I knew no one except the guy who's now my husband, who at the time had a failing business and no time to hang out with me. And it was really, really hard. I think that was probably the darkest time for me, maybe ever. I mean, I didn't have any friends. I lived in this like kind of crazy place. I was living on the top floor of this really like beautiful looking from the outside house, but like the water basically never worked. We often didn't have electricity. Like I was sharing it with this girl who was kind of weird. And, the Ethiopians that owned the complex that we were living in were like often slaughtering goats at the bottom of my stairs. And like, it was hard. It was really hard. It was raining every day and you're like I was like walking with mud up to my boots. And it was hard. It was really hard. But I think anytime you move to a new place, it takes time to find your stride and find people that you can share time with and really get along with. And it took me a good 6 weeks, which is also the end of the rainy season, which was helpful. And I found ways to connect with people. I ended up buying a horse. I owned a horse in Ethiopia and, found a stable in Ethiopia where I ended up making some really, really wonderful, amazing friends. And like, I would ride there. I would literally get a cab to take me to the stable at 5 a.m., ride for an hour and a half, and then go to work. And it was great. I made some incredible friends. Actually, one of my best friends who ended up being my roommate there for a little while, lives in Silver Spring now and has a 2-year-old little boy. And we see each other with some frequency. And it was hard. I didn't know the language. The language is really tough to learn. I spent a lot of time trying to learn the language. And now I have enough Amharic to sort of scare the people that I meet that are Ethiopian. As they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Ethiopia." And I'm like, "Oh, salam no, and no." And they're like, "Oh."
Totally.
So that's really fun. But yeah, Ethiopia gets under your skin. It's a beautiful country. The food is amazing. The people are wonderful. There's so much good work to be done there. But you have to have like serious patience. I remember one time I was, so in order to work in Ethiopia, you have to have a work permit, right? Mm-hmm. And getting the work permit is like this magical like maze, and it's really hard to figure out how to do it. So you're like weaving through this whole thing. And I remember I like got everything done. I had to like actually have my actual diploma with me in order to get it. And so that was a whole thing. Anyway, long story short, I go to the thing to pick up this work visa that's been this like long process to get it. I'm like, "Hi, I'm Lindsey. I'm here to pick up my work visa." And they're like, "Okay, you need a letter." And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "You need a letter saying that you're allowed to pick it up." And I was like, "Sorry, you need a letter that states that Lindsey McCrickard is allowed to pick up Lindsey McCrickard's visa?" And they were like, "Yes." And I was like, "Can you give me some paper? I'll just write it right now." And they're like, no, it has to be on official letterhead. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" So I had to like leave, go back to my place of work, print out a letter that said Lindsey McCrickard can get Lindsey McCrickard's visa, signed Lindsey McCrickard, and then go back and get married.
Oh my God. When I was living in Taiwan, that's exactly how it was. And it was like, I swear to God, it was arbitrary. Like, one time you'd show up to get your visa renewed and everything would be fine. And the next time you'd show up and they'd be like, "Now you need this, this, and this." And it was just like, are there rules written down somewhere where I could, nope.
Nope.
That's so weird.
No. It's definitely the same there. So it just takes a lot of patience, I think, doing international stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, okay. Now from Addis Ababa, that's when you, after 10 months in, so you were with the FAO for Addis Ababa, and then you were with the DAI in Addis Ababa. And then you came back to the States and you were working for the CDC?
Yes.
At that point. So we've talked a little bit about that. That was a fellowship program, super interesting. But tell me about being involved in like the international responses for these disease outbreaks. Like I remember the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, and there were a couple of doctors that got infected and actually died. I mean, it must have been in a way terrifying.
It was. I mean, I think, when your passion is epidemiology and disease control, there's always going to be potential risks, right? When you're responding to that stuff. And for me, sorry, my dog is like about to make some noise. For me, I was definitely nervous, but I was also well informed on how to keep my risk low and what to do to minimize my risk. So I did respond to the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, and when I was there, the craziest thing that happened was there was you land in Sierra Leone, and by that time they had been working on trying to get this outbreak under control for almost a year. And historically, Sierra Leone is a very loving and caring and nurturing environment. People are hugging and kissing and saying hello and, kissing on each cheek. And all of that had to stop as part of the response. And so you would go into an office where you would meet, like I met the Minister of Health, and they were introducing me to the Minister of Health. And I walked up, and, you just don't even think. You're like, hi, nice to meet you. And, his immediate response is like, unfortunately, we do this now. And it is extremely isolating to be in a place where I was there for, I guess, 3.5, 4 weeks. And I didn't touch another person, not at all. And you don't realize how often you touch people until you can't. And, you're walking around and, you're seeing your friends, you're working with these people day in, day out. There's no touching them on the back. There's no handshaking. There's no hugging. There's no nothing. And so that was probably the strangest. The strangest part of the outbreak was like how much it had changed, even down to like cultural norms, as part of the response efforts.
Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, I might have it mixed up with something else, but the culture down there is not only very, very touchy-feely, but also don't they have like rituals with dead relatives where they want the body, and I don't know. They have a lot of physical contact with the body after their loved one dies.
Yeah, and that depends by sort of region and country specifically. But in Sierra Leone, one of the challenges was that tradition includes a ritualistic washing, like the relatives wash the body of the dead relative. And studies have shown that Ebola, when people die, the secretions are extremely high in Ebola virus. And, that transmission is incredibly easy at that point. And so you have these heartbreaking stories of families, especially towards the beginning of the outbreak, before some of this response was in place, of being really, trying to follow traditional practices. And actually we literally would draw on the board, this person died, and then like their wife got sick, and then their kids got sick, and then their cousins got sick. And you would just see, an entire family being affected by the outbreak. So yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So another part of your job is understanding the culture there, and how the cultural traditions might be a challenge in terms of controlling an outbreak.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And we rely a lot on other people that have either been in the country for a really long time, or different types of data gathering methodologies to get a better handle on that. Storytelling is really helpful when you're looking at traditional and cultural and behavioral things. Focus group discussions are really helpful to get a handle on that. But it is a steep learning curve. And, what is tradition in Ethiopia is certainly not tradition in Sierra Leone, is not tradition in the US. And, that you really do have to understand that to do any sort of outbreak response.
Mm-hmm. But all part of the super exciting, fascinating part of your life.
Yes, it is. It's great.
All right. Now, I want to be able to have enough time to talk about what you're doing now, because from your title, Director of Training of Global Health Programs at the Smithsonian Institution, what the heck is that? What are you doing? And why is a veterinarian? Why?
What? No, that's totally fair. I am so lucky to have the job that I do. I love it. I've only been there a few months, but it's been so fun and so exciting. The Global Health Program actually grew out of the veterinary team at the National Zoo. So originally, years ago, the National Zoo vets were being requested to go travel internationally and help with outbreak response or training or clinical assistance to various countries that didn't have, trained zoo vets or trained wildlife vets. And so that program sort of was a little haphazard. And out of that program, we've developed the Global Health Program. And the Global Health Program is focused on sort of three things: training and capacity building, international partners, wildlife health research, and then sort of emerging infectious diseases and research side of things. And so one of the big projects our group does is the PREDICT project. We run the PREDICT program in Myanmar and Kenya. And the PREDICT program is, it's been going on for like 9 years now, where you basically are trying to figure out what the next emerging pandemic could be. And so they're in the countries that we work in, we sample bats, primates, and small rodents, and basically look for potential emerging zoonotic diseases. At the same time, in the same locations, we interview people and get to know their cultural and behavioral processes, the things that they do around wildlife and livestock. And then we also sample the humans to see if there's any potential spillover that's already happening that maybe hasn't been identified yet. So that's a really cool project that we work on. We also are doing training programs for international veterinarians. And that's sort of what I was hired for, is to kind of wrangle all of our training programs and capacity building programs. I love training. I love figuring out how to, get hands-on training for people that's going to stick with them. It's not a PowerPoint presentation 9 times out of 10. It's hands-on, it's problem-based, it's getting them on a computer and figuring out how to manipulate the data themselves. And so that's really where I really love working on stuff. So, we're basically developing projects right now and looking for funding for a wide range of stuff. One of our colleagues was in Bhutan last week, and we're looking at putting together a workshop on takin management for them.
What's takin?
Oh my God, go Google it. It's a great little wildlife species. They look kind of like hairy, furry sheep goats.
Okay.
Like big, the males have some big horns. They're great. They're great. And so we're doing that. We've got, we're working on a few proposals that are sort of in development with a couple of partners to do some capacity building in laboratories and schools and, wildlife health training programs. We're also, what else am I doing? I feel like there's a whole list of things. A workshop in Myanmar. We want to get a better handle on some of the more behavioral stuff of how people perceive wildlife and human interactions. I'm working on developing a proposal right now with Auburn University for a potential training or not training program, but a research project in Madagascar to look at human-wildlife interaction around Ranamafana National Park. So it's great. I feel like the stuff that I'm doing is just so wide-ranging, and I really get to kind of play with things within the training and capacity building arena. So.
And this is all, so you're the director, so it's all self-directed. Like you're deciding, well, what workshops you're going to set up, what projects you're going to take on, prioritizing all that stuff.
For the most part, the Global Health Program has a director who is my direct supervisor, and she's great. Dr. Suzanne Murray. She's been working in the zoo vet world for years and years, and she's really the brainchild of this program. And she also is, really, really helpful in letting us kind of run with our interests and allowing us to make decisions. She's there to kind of guide us and make sure we're still going in the right direction and not taking some kind of crazy off the beaten path trail. But for the most part, she's very supportive of projects and proposals that we come up with. So it's a lot of fun. It's also funny too. The people I work with, 6 other veterinarians besides her, and is that right? 6 or so. And almost every single one of us has taken a different path to get to where we are. So, some people are very traditional, did vet school, internship, zoo residency, and then worked in the zoo for years and now work with us. Some of them were living in Uganda and working on gorillas for years and then joined us. And, we've got another one who did DVM and then a master's and then a PhD. And she's very much research focused. And, and then there's me, and I'm just like, I got a DVM. Yay.
But so experience counts for a lot. You've done a lot of amazing things. I could totally see how you could end up there. But tell me about,
it's all about,
pardon me?
Oh, I said, it's all about the experience and making sure that you're, you can create experiences for yourself that take you the direction you want to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can explain those experiences in a way to other people that makes them go, oh yeah, you're totally perfect for this job, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But tell me about your work-life balance, because it sounds like you're juggling a whole lot of stuff. And how do you...
It's challenging. And I think whenever you start a new job, there's always that period of like, ooh, how do I do this? How do I balance all of this stuff? And now I'm married and we have a dog, and my husband still works for his company in Ethiopia and now also Rwanda. They're expanding. And so he travels once a month and is gone for a week at least, somewhere between 7 and 10 days a month. And so he and I think have done a pretty good job of figuring out that balance. But it has been a work in progress. I work, my hours are usually, 8 a.m. to about 5:30 p.m. every day. So they're not unreasonable. Mm-hmm. On the weekends, I occasionally have to work, but I'm not always working on the weekends, which is great because it gives me the opportunity to go do things I like to do, like hiking and swimming and biking and getting exercise and out of the house and seeing friends and all that good stuff. And during the week, some nights are social nights. I've been taking an improv class.
Fun.
And I still ride horses. I'm out at Rock Creek Park doing horseback riding once a week. Take lessons out there. And so just making time for yourself. Mm-hmm. You've gotta do that. Make time to keep yourself healthy mm-hmm. and happy and engaged. But it's not always easy.
Right. But you sound like you have a very well-rounded life.
Well, I'm trying. Sometimes I feel like I overcommit. I mean, last week, for example, by Wednesday, I was like, I'm dying. I'm so tired. I can't get through this week. And every morning I was supposed to get up and exercise. And every morning I'd be like, oh, I can't do it. I need to sleep another half an hour. I just can't do it. And so, some weeks are better than others. And,
right.
And it comes across as like, oh yeah, she's totally got it figured out. Like, no, I don't. Like, I have to get up and take care of the dog every morning. And half the mornings I'm like, why do I have a dog?
Well, she gets you out of the house, right? Because you got to take her for a walk.
Yeah. She forces me to make sure I'm at least getting a walk every day, if nothing else. And I bike to work, which is a great way to sort of force yourself to do a little exercise on your commute. I've been biking to work for a while now, and it's a really, really great way to do that. People are always like really shocked to see me on a bike. Like I have a dentist appointment this afternoon. I'm going to bike there too. And people are always kind of shocked to see you because like earlier this week it was like snowing and I'm like like on my little bike, and one of my colleagues was like, what is wrong with you? And you know what, I could walk, I could drive, but realistically, driving in DC is kind of a pain. And if I walk, it's going to take me like 3 times as long to get to work. So I might as well just hop on the bike. I'll get to work really fast.
Oh my gosh.
Less time in the snow.
That's great. That's great. You're biking on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of like, I'm sure that part of that, does that come from your time in Rome, because it's sort of a European way of living. You walk.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I walked to work every day while I was in Italy, or I took public transportation. I never had a car. Yeah. Again, goes back to me being cheap. Same in Ethiopia. I never had a car. I walked all over the place. And I still am quite a big walker. People will be like, oh, like it takes a half an hour to walk there. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And I like start walking. Everyone else is like, why aren't we getting in a car? But it actually started when I was living in Atlanta, and Atlanta's traffic is miserable. And I realized that I was getting to work and I was just really frustrated and tired, and, having this start to my day that was negative. And the weather in Atlanta is usually pretty mild. Mm-hmm. So I bought a road bike and found a route that was safe, which was a 6-mile one-way bike commute to work.
That's good.
But I found that, I was biking on these great trails and seeing this beautiful scenery. And by the time I got to work, I'd had a good workout and I was like feeling good. And that was just such a great way to start my day that now I just prefer it.
I love that. Do you, just coming to the end of our talk now, do you have any last minute advice that you'd like to offer future veterinarians or maybe even present veterinarians who are thinking of maybe wanting to follow a path like yours?
I mean, just be brave. Just, figure out what risks you're willing to take and take them. If that means that you're going to have to cut back a little bit on, I don't know, maybe you're like, well, I can't afford my gym membership if I'm going to go do this crazy thing. Like, you can run outside, you can get a bike, and figure out what it is that you really want. I mean, we spend 40 plus, right? Sometimes 80 plus hours a week doing work. If you're not loving that, then you're really spending tons of time doing something that you don't like. And if you're working 80 hours, you're certainly not in a good work-life balance. So if you hate your work and that's all you're doing, get out, change it up. I think it just goes back to being brave, taking risks, and being open to opportunities when they come up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great advice. Well, it certainly worked well for you. Dr. Shields?
It didn't always look like it was going to go well. Okay. Definitely, there were some periods of time that I was like, I've made a horrible mistake.
But I mean, that's part of learning. Like you roll with the punches, right? And then you figure it out. And as you figure it out and you come up on top, that adds to your self-esteem and your self-respect. And you take that with you to the next step.
Definitely. And you don't always come out on top. Like sometimes you fail and you fail hard, and you pick yourself up and you say, okay, now I know that I'm not going to do that again. And I mean, I remember I was at an international conference or something, and I said something that, I shouldn't have said, that offended somebody at the table. And I felt awful about that for days, but you learn from it. And now I feel very comfortable, working in cross-cultural situations and being in a place that maybe a woman is not normally seen, and figuring out how to manage that situation and being culturally sensitive. So it's going to happen. You're going to screw up. It's going to be painful. You're going to feel horrible, but it's not going to be the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And as a thank you, do you have any charities that you'd like to tell listeners about?
Love to. So I volunteer for City Dogs Rescue in DC. It's a great rescue organization that's been around for years. They adopt out hundreds of dogs. And they do everything from finding these dogs from shelters in, West Virginia, rural Maryland, and they bring them to DC and they put them with fosters and they take care of all of their medical bills. And then people can adopt them out. And I'm an adoption coordinator for them. So I help out with identifying potential adoptees and figuring out how to match the dog with their new family. And, these people work hard. No one's paid. We work a lot of hours for this organization. And it's really all to benefit these dogs that need new homes. And so if you're thinking about donating and you want a cause to donate to, definitely take a look at City Dogs. We always have dogs that need more veterinary care than we currently have an ease of providing. So, funding for veterinary care is usually one of the hardest things.
Right. Okay. So that's City Dogs Rescue in DC. I'll put that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Dr. Shields, thank you so much for your time. It's been so fun catching up. I've been wondering for so long, what is her life like? And I'm so honored,
Dr. You got to come visit. You got to come visit me in DC sometime.
Oh my gosh, someday I will. Yeah. I mean, you can give me a tour of the Smithsonian Institution.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Always want to
go hang out at the zoo. I'll take you on a free tour of the zoo.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's it. I'm going in the summertime.
Yeah, don't come yet. It's still too cold.
All right. But thank you again for your time. And I'm so happy for you. And it just sounds like you're having such a great life. And I'm just incredibly happy for you. And go you, really. Good for you.
Oh, come on. Go all of us. We're all just fuddling around trying to figure it out, and might as well have fun doing it, right?
It's true.
Thanks so much. Fun.